Senator Duckworth is an Iraq War veteran and a Purple Heart recipient. She was among the first Army women to fly combat missions during Operation Iraqi Freedom after deploying to Iraq in 2004 as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot for the Illinois Army National Guard. Duckworth served in the Reserve Forces for 23 years before retiring from military service in 2014 at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. On November 12, 2004, her helicopter was hit by an RPG, and Duckworth lost her legs and partial use of her right arm. Senator Duckworth spent the next year recovering at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where she quickly became an advocate for her fellow soldiers. Following her recovery, she became director of the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs, and in 2009, President Obama appointed Duckworth to be the Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs. She was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2016 after representing Illinois' 8th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives for 2 terms. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, thank you.
Running late, and hopefully he'll be here to join us, Congressman Mark Takano. For more than 20 years, Mark Takano has worked to improve the lives of Riverside County residents, both as an elected official and as a teacher at Rialto High School. Born and raised in Riverside, California, Mark's commitment to public service began at an early age. His family roots in Riverside go back to his grandparents, who, along with his parents, were removed from their respective homes and sent to Japanese-American internment camps during World War II. After the war, these 2 families settled in Riverside County to rebuild their lives. In 2012, Mark became the first openly gay person of color to be elected to Congress and now serves as chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. Also running late to join us is Congressman Vicente Gonzalez. He's currently serving his 2nd term in the U.S. Congress as the elected representative of the 15th District of Texas, which comprises counties in Central and South Texas, including parts of the U.S.-Mexico border and the Rio Grande Valley. In the 116th Congress, Congressman Gonzalez serves on the House Committees on Financial Services and Foreign Affairs. Congressman Gonzalez is a proud member of the Blue Dog Coalition's Task Force on National Defense, a group that proactively promotes a strong national defense and supports efforts to improve the lives of service members and veterans. And last but not least, our moderator today is Carlos Luna, who I'm here sitting with us. He served in the Navy from 2004 to 2009 as an aviation electronics technician and deployed to the Persian Gulf in 2007 to 2008 as part of OIF and OEF. He has a bachelor's in industrial and organizational psychology and a master's in community psychology, both from DePaul University. He is a certified peer support specialist through the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance and certified as a veteran service officer through the National Association of County Veteran Service Officers. In 2017, Mr. Luna co-founded the only trauma-informed peer support program for veterans detained in the Cook County Department of Corrections in Chicago. He serves as the president of a Chicago-based chapter of the League of United Latin American Citizens, Green Card Veterans, to influence policy by changing the narrative regarding non-citizen U.S. service members, veterans, and their families exiled through deportation. Thank you, Carlos, for being here today, and I'll let you take the panel from here.
Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you, Senator Duckworth, for not just participating in this panel, but being proactive in this topic, this phenomenon. So I definitely appreciate the level of advocacy, would be the right word, that we do for veterans within these systems. So I would just like to start off with maybe a brief overview of your understanding of the issue that we may not have an idea of in more popular narratives. So to be able to shed light into some of what your understanding of this phenomenon is.
Sure. Well, most Americans don't realize that we have people who serve in our military who are not citizens of the United States. They're very surprised that that is allowed, and then they are very surprised that people are not given citizenship upon their military service. And the issue really is that there's been a whole series of conflicting policies within different administrations and also within the DoD on whether or not we grant citizenship to people who serve and how we handle them in the rest of government post-service. So for example, in 2002, President Bush initiated a presidential directive that said if you serve in the military and you are deployed, we offer you citizenship, that you can get your citizenship. And that was the case in my unit. My helicopter unit had green card holders, permanent legal residents who, before we went overseas, were granted the citizenship as we were going out the door. So that was in keeping with President Bush's policy. Unfortunately, that was not implemented in a uniform way across the United States and across the military. So some folks were offered it, some folks were not, depending on whether or not the unit knew about it, depending on whether or not there was the capacity. Later on in 2009, the DoD entered into an agreement with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service that together they would allow veterans, people who entered into the military, to get citizenship and go through that process during basic training. So that even as they're finishing their initial training, going into the military services, that they would be able to get their citizenship. And that was something that was initiated in a partnership between DoD and USCIS. That was ongoing until President Trump got elected. When President Trump was elected, that ended. The DoD just on its own said, we're not going to do this anymore. And then subsequent to that, USCIS shut down all of their offices in partnership with DoD and all of the basic training stations. So we've had this policy in the past where, yeah, you can enlist, you can serve, and we're helping get citizenship, but it was not uniform, it was not across the board. So in Chicago, for example, we have this case that I got very involved in, and I'm still involved in, of a young man who served, who enlisted prior to the 2002 presidential directive from President Bush, does one tour of duty in Afghanistan, comes home. When he comes home from deployment, at this point the directive is in effect, but he's never told about it and he's never processed for his citizenship when he comes home from deployment. A little while later, he gets deployed on the second tour of duty. When he's being processed to be deployed, he finds out about the directive. He thinks he's filled out the paperwork, but it's actually never filed administratively. He goes back overseas, does the deployment, comes back, and then he's also not offered to finish the paperwork. So 3 different times, the DoD failed to either offer or complete his citizenship paperwork. He at this point thinks he's on his way to being a citizen. He has undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder from his first tour of duty, starts self-medicating, eventually gets kicked off of out of the military with a dishonorable discharge. It might be a general, but anyway, it was another honorable discharge. He also now is back home in Chicago, medicating. He gets arrested holding cocaine. Sentenced to 7 years in prison, is a model prisoner, paroled in 4 years, gets a college degree while he's in prison. In prison was the first time he got any mental help, and in prison was the first time the VA actually finally diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress related to his service back in 2001 and 2002. He does his term, gets paroled. He thinks he is going home to his family. He walks out the door of the prison and they put him in a van and take him to ICE, who then detain him for another 2 years, and now he's in Tijuana. They've deported him, never given him a chance. And so he did everything he thought he did correctly. And then many times the systems failed him. And there's now this population of veterans who have been deployed, not just in Mexico, but around the world, who thought, some of them thought that they were on their way to citizenship, but who certainly have earned the benefits that they should be getting from the VA and have no access to those benefits. And I think Americans would be, most Americans when they hear this, actually appalled that we would do this to someone who actually wore the uniform and bled for us.
Thank you. I think that's a very good description of what the problem, what it looks like. And I think one of the big questions that comes in debating, whether it's the case that you're speaking about or the phenomenon in general is whether or not citizenship should be guaranteed based on service. Now, different people have different opinions on that, but what do you believe in that regard? Do you believe that there should be an automatic citizenship with service, or do you believe that there should be a process to engage in, whether that's in the way of executive order or, you know, in the legislation? What do you believe in that?
Well, I've introduced legislation multiple times, including the most recent that would grant citizenship upon successful completion of military service and with an OTH or above discharge. That puts it in line with you accessing the VA benefits. So that would be the same as anybody else. If you have an OTH or above, you can get your VA benefits. We'll then do the same thing for citizenship. So I think citizenship should be something that I don't think that we force it upon people, but I say if somebody wants to become an American citizen and they have served, and they get the OTH or above, then they should become a citizen. I mean, it should be that simple.
I can appreciate that, Senator. What about the cases for, we offer protections for citizens that we don't offer for non-citizens. Particularly one that comes to mind is consulate protections abroad. What about the serving immigrants who are off visiting family and with the world being unstable, they would need them? So do you believe that there are exceptions for whether or not somebody completes a term, and do you believe that there are protocols and processes already in place to whether that is denaturalize somebody or if something happens down the line? What are your feelings on that?
Well, I mean, I think that if you serve, you should become a citizen. You should be able to become a citizen based on your service, and that should be something that is across a DOD and be consistent. And the problem that we've had is that we've had many of these initiatives; they've just not been uniformly implemented across the Department of the DOD. And so I do think that the privileges of citizenship are something that you earn when you put on the uniform. And I would certainly support legislation along those lines. I've introduced legislation along those lines. I would support that policy. But at this point, it's about trying to claw back any type of effort we can to go back to providing citizenship, because President Trump's administration has stopped that process completely. So there's not even a single option at this point. Oh, I'm getting it. I am in the middle of votes. I voted, I came back, I came here, and now I have to go back and do my second vote. So I do apologize, I do have to run. But I have introduced legislation to this effect. And then I also have introduced legislation that would identify on your immigration or visa paperwork that you are a military veteran. Because that's not on there. So you have someone who's applying for citizenship, or someone who's applying for their permanent residency status, someone who's applying for whatever immigration paperwork. There's nothing on there that shows that you've served this country in uniform. And I think that should be on there, because I think most judges, if they saw that, was like, oh, wait, would actually go appreciate seeing that, and would certainly give them the credit for that as well. And I also introduced legislation that says that our veterans who are currently deported should be granted a visa in order to come back to the United States in order to access their VA benefits and health care, because they've certainly earned it and they're entitled to it. And I would like to also send VA services into Tijuana and where most of these veterans are, but into Mexico, so that they can get the services that they've earned. And to say that you can't access them is wrong, because we actually have veterans in places like the Philippines who've retired, where we actually have a VA office there. So we do this. I just said it over in the audience. So if we do this for other veterans, why wouldn't we do it for the ones that we've deported who are the more recent veterans?
Great. And Senator, I know you have to run, but I just have one more question, if you can. With this GAO study that came out within the last month, what do you think the appropriate legislative response from our elected officials such as yourself and from our government should be to the findings that the majority of the veterans who were deported without the proper protocols being followed? So how do we respond to that? Because essentially what that's saying is that we have some disabled, some undiagnosed, but all of them struggling, who were exiled through deportation without having the proper considerations done. So now that we know this, what are we going to do?
Well, I mean, number one, I think that's wrong, and I think that what we should do is set the clock back, allow them back in. If they're going to go through that process, go through it the right way, but allow them to make their case and allow them, such as in the case of the one veteran I talked about, they should be backdating his citizenship paperwork, because he supported it, but he submitted it, but it was never processed by DOD. We should backdate any diagnosis for post-traumatic stress so that he can get the benefit of that. And we should be looking at changing the dishonorable discharge based on his mental health condition to at least an OTH or above. And so I think that for all of these veterans, we should be resetting the clock and allowing them to be treated the right way, and basically giving them the benefit of the doubt. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
All right, a huge thanks to, please another round of applause for Senator Duckworth. She's done some amazing things. I first had the opportunity to work with her when I was at VA. I was doing congressional affairs, and she was in the Office of Public Affairs as the Assistant Secretary there. And it's been incredible to watch her career just continue to, for her to continue to do just amazing things, and first become a Congresswoman and now a United States Senator in pretty short order. I mean, we were working together, it seems like not very long ago. I guess I better do some bigger things with my life.
Get on it.
Yeah, right. I haven't tried. I ran for state delegate. I couldn't do that, so that was taking too small. I like this guy. So, I'm really proud of our veteran policy team. They put together a panel of a lot of incredible lawmakers. The challenge is, I'm sure you all can respect what that is, if you do that and on Capitol Hill and you run into votes. Now we have Vicente Gonzalez, so see? Vicente, we just had Senator Tammy Duckworth, and I guess we're just, we're doing one-on-ones. We're doing firesides on this issue instead of panels. So thank you for coming. This is Carlos. I'm going to get out of the way here.
Well, Congressman, thank you very much for being here. I know you guys are very busy. Your office in particular is very involved in the deported veteran issue. So definitely appreciate that, being on the vanguard of that issue. And one of the questions that I asked Senator Duckworth is, what do you believe that service should guarantee citizenship?
I do, and actually it does. We just don't seem to fulfill that promise many times. When you're 18 or 19 or 20 years old, you're sitting in a foxhole in the desert. The last thing you're thinking about is filling out your immigration documentation. But I believe everybody who has an honorable discharge at the time of discharge should be U.S. citizens. The fact is, if you go to a military swearing in, the language is almost exactly as the swearing into a citizenship. And we sometimes, as you know, many recruiters overpromise in high schools and places to recruit our young military service members, and sometimes we don't deliver what we promised. I can't think of anything more shameful than to deport somebody who wore a uniform and fought for our freedom.
So I definitely appreciate that, and you mentioned after service and the characterization of the discharge. What is your position on the characterization of discharge, and if it is important, what importance does that have?
That's right. Under my bill, Repatriate Our Patriots Act, you must have been honorably discharged. And I put in some crimes for which you are still deportable. and that's rape, murder, sexual assault of a child, and a terrorist act against our country. In fact, I'm willing to deport some Americans for those crimes. So I did that. It's a bipartisan bill. I have some Republican support. I have Don Young, one of the most conservative, and the dean to our Congress, who co-sponsored this bill with me. And I hope that we get it to the floor sometime soon.
Well, definitely hope that gets some traction. And appreciate again your efforts on that bill. I know you guys have been very proactive in trying to get support for that. But you mentioned some of the criminal convictions, right? Now, under our justice system, we see not a leniency for veterans, but we see some considerations for veterans with the development of veteran treatment courts. Do you see veteran treatment courts having a role in this phenomenon? And if so, how?
I do. I think veterans should have a special place in our judicial system, especially when they come back from war, many of them suffering from PTSD. As you know, we're still losing 20 veterans every single day to suicide. But in veterans court, most of them are drugs and alcohol or assault. They're able to go to classes and get a pretrial conversion to where it's never a final conviction and it's never a final plea, which saves them from deportation. We also recently had the governor of California pardon some convicted military service members who have been able to repatriate to the United States. I think that's something that I think after you've paid your debt to society, and I think that's an option that governors have around the country, and I think they should do the right thing.
Well, thank you. So for everybody else, I want to introduce Congressman Takano. Thank you very much, Chairman, for being here, and I appreciate your time. I will jump right into it, and the question that I had asked Congressman Gonzalez was what role, if any, a veteran treatment court would have on saving veterans from deportation, given that precedent, that precursor that needs to happen.
Well, I would hope that we could find a way to identify every veteran who enters the justice system, whether they're a green card holder, whether they might be a dreamer or sub-dreamers who served in our military, whether they're women with children. We know that suicides are, not suicides, but homelessness among women veterans, especially with children, is rising even as the overall number of homeless veterans decreases. And the reason why I kind of mention those veterans who are vulnerable to deportation because of their encounters with law enforcement, we're also seeing that women veterans in crisis facing legal problems. Legal problems are a stressor that leads to crisis and can lead to all sorts of extra challenges in a veteran's life. So women veterans are facing being separated from their children by the justice system, by DPSS, by the local DPSS authorities. So I think there's a need for us to identify all veterans generally as a way to divert veterans into veterans courts. How evenly and uniformly these veteran courts are available, how local prosecutors decide to bring forward charges. There's a lot of prosecutorial discretion. So when it comes to veterans, we need to kind of have an understanding with states and local district attorneys that veterans of all folk, of all people, deserve some consideration. Extra due consideration, because they very well could be carrying with them combat-related conditions, whether it's attempts to get into bar fights, whether it's DUIs, whether it's substance abuse, but it's any number of ways in which their state of mind can lead to encounters with the law. And of course, it's the going through the justice system, being convicted of a felony or aggravated assault, whatever it is, that is leading to the deportation of people who are in uniform of our country. This is one of the things I think we need, one of the strategies we need to do to reduce the number of veterans. Of course, we don't know how many veterans. I tried to get Mr. Vargas, Representative Vargas and I, we wrote a letter to the GAO trying to get an accounting for how many veterans this has happened to, but ICE is not even following their own policies regarding their responsibility to also ask this question. So ICE has their own internal policies that says they're supposed to identify who is a veteran that comes into contact with them. But I also think more generally, not just ICE, but every law enforcement agency needs to do it, and we probably should find a way in which the VA might be able to offer intervention in some way, or that we have interventions that are set up across the country in a uniform way.
And actually, Mr. Takano, you took us into one of the other questions, which brings up that GAO report. Now, I know that they found several different ways to tell us that they don't know what the number is. But essentially what they did tell us is that a large percentage of those who they did identify that they deported were deported without following those protocols, right, as you mentioned. So I pose the question to Senator Duckworth, what happens now? Now that we know ICE is not following their own protocols when it comes to a subculture that is revered in our society, what do we do now? Right? I mean, if we can't, well, what do we do?
Well, clearly as lawmakers, we should pressure agencies to do their job. And there's a rule in place to ask that question, especially upon deportation. We should have an accurate database of how many veterans are deported. Right now, we don't know the exact number. People will guess between a few hundred to a few thousand. I know that my office has a record of deportations to 38 countries around the world, and we're regularly contacted by folks in every continent in the world of American heroes who have been deported. The vast majority that I've communicated with have been due to drugs and alcohol, which is a symptom of coming home with PTSD and not having enough care. I don't think we give our veterans the necessary care that they deserve to transition them back into society. Another huge concern is I feel we've breached their contract. When they sign on that dotted line to serve our country and be honorably discharged, they were going to have a GI Bill to go to school, a VA loan to purchase a home, and health care. And when we deport them around the world, they have no access to the benefits that they have rightfully already earned. That's just a fact.
Mr. Takano, would you have anything to add to that?
Well, Vicente is absolutely correct that when veterans are deported, it's much more difficult for them to access their benefits. One of the results of my having led a delegation from the Veterans Affairs Committee to Tijuana, where fortunately there is some support for veterans. It was actually it was called the Veterans Support House, it was called the Bunker. I'm trying to remember the name of the individual who Hector Barajas. As a result of that trip, we discovered that there were deported veterans who were unable to see physicians who could do the qualifying exams for disability benefit because they had to travel to Mexico City, Tijuana, or Guadalajara, and they didn't have money to even with the price points in Mexico travel those distances. So as a result of that, we were able to make sure that there were that there were contract doctors in Tijuana to be able to see those veterans. They are entitled to their educational benefits, so they can go to accredited schools in Mexico. But we don't really have a full accounting of where these veterans are. I mean, not all of them are in Mexico. Some of them are deported to other countries. And so, you know, it's not just a Hispanic or Latino issue. We know that there are veterans, a Korean veteran who is called Korean American, though he's not he was a green card. You know, he's lived most of his life in the United States, and they were going to deport him to Korea. So, you know, we just don't have the kind of infrastructure throughout the world to make sure that we support veterans who are entitled to the benefits. Let's go back to the topic of suicide. I declared suicide to be the #1 issue, policy issue for the Veterans Affairs Committee. And veterans who call the Veterans Suicide Hotline from foreign countries, we know that the access has been spotty at best. So when we were down in Mexico, we tried to call the suicide hotline, and there was no answer, and unable to get help on the other side of the line. So the access to benefits is a real, but it's also a lifesaver. There are stories of examples of people who did qualify for benefits, and that couple of $1,000 that comes every month while you're living in a place like Mexico, that's a real godsend.
And well, I can definitely appreciate that in my own work with some of the veterans that have been deported and have started to receive some of those benefits. One of the biggest, I think, assets that many of us veterans have when overcoming some of the demons that we may face, whether they are from before the military, during the military, even after the military, depending on our life trajectory, is the support network that we've managed to build around us, right? There's a study that came out on veterans in Chicagoland that showed that nearly half of post 9/11 veterans, I think it was around 48%, felt disconnected from the community around them, right? The exact same community that they left before enlisting. So then what do we tell the veterans, like the one that Senator Duckworth described earlier, where they went off to Afghanistan, they never really returned, were incarcerated, upwards of a decade, and then literally their first interaction with the outside world was in a country that was probably as foreign to them as the valleys in Afghanistan. And they're waiting out there for now with their small checks. So what do we say to them? What can we say to them until we fix this?
Well, I clearly believe we owe them an apology as a country, but I think we should find ways to try to repatriate them. Not only that, but when we talk about access to naturalizing service members, we have very little outreach in all but one branch, which is the Air Force, and they're the most aggressive in having an outreach program to non-citizen service members, bringing them in, lawyers, JAGs, bringing them in and saying, hey, we're going to help you work through the paperwork to become a citizen while you're in the service, or certainly by the time you are discharged. And I think we should do more of it, not less, and I think under this administration we cut back on some of those programs. I think that's something that we should be doing now. While I think the last number that I saw, we have around 10,000 active military members who are non-citizens, and we should have a very aggressive outreach program to them. In my district, we just recently repatriated one young man who was actually stopped at the deportation. I think you were involved in that, right?
I was.
Right.
Thank you for that.
And I think we're doing some PSA announcements to non-citizen veterans who are in my district to let them know that, hey, you can come to my congressional office and let us help you work through the paperwork to get the guarantee that you deserve and that you've earned being honored or discharged in the American military.
Thank you. And thank you for your work with that as well. That was great.
We had to kind of shame the judge to doing the right thing, and that's not the norm, unfortunately. I mean, I hope we didn't have to shame. I hope they did it on their own, but I've had some cases where that was not the outcome, and there's no uniformity in the country, as you know. What the result that we had in that case in my district was very positive, but you could have had the very exact same circumstances, 100 miles away, and the result would have been very different. They could have been deported. So that's the way it worked.
I too had a case of a veteran who was transiting through Houston, coming from Mexico. He was doing business in Mexico. He is my constituent, and he was in detention. My office was able to get him out of detention. Long story short is that the basis for him being held was a conviction or something he pled to in Florida, in Miami, several years ago. And he was able, what ultimately occurred was that his counsel was disbarred in the meantime, and his conviction was vacated, and he was able to eventually made his way and became a citizen. It's a happy story, it's a happy ending to the story. It was one of the more bigger victories that I know in my office. We were able to get him out of detention, and then after a year after his release, he was able to go through all the legal hoops to have his case vacated and be eligible for citizenship and actually show us the picture of him being sworn in. And they brought all of the veterans to the front of the room. There were 10 of them. And as he said, they were all from asshole countries. And he was just really proud because he said, look, Congressman, all these people who serve the country, come from the countries that our president denigrated. But he was so proud at that moment. And here's the thing, I come from my great uncle served in World War II. They were Nisei soldiers in the 442nd Infantry Battalion. They stepped forward and served this country, even as their families were being interned in internment camps. And it was obvious to me that Hector Barajas and the other veterans there were so proud of that military service. He was airborne, and it was one of the proudest moments of his life. And they were still proud, even as they were exiled. And I told this story to them, they could relate to what I was talking about, how you love a country that is still not being right with you. And I thank them for their service, and I thank them for still loving America, even though America is not showing love to them. And that's the moral principle that we've got to communicate with American people. The American people, many of them just don't believe that it's happening. They just don't believe it. We've done this. And look, this doesn't have to be about this administration. This is something that has occurred across administrations. It's a broken immigration system. It's a military that doesn't fully stand behind the promises it makes when they recruit people. It's the duty of the military, I think, to help somebody who is a green card holder or a dreamer who's allowed to serve, to make sure that service member is informed about the pathway to citizenship, and that there's a duty to care for that. I feel very strongly that we've got to welcome home these veterans that have been exiled from our country, and we've got to do everything we can to reform our armed services operating the branches of the military from the point of induction, from the point of their recruitment, ultimately to the point at which they raise their hand the second time after they swear an oath at the beginning of allegiance, that they should be able to, during their tenure in the military, have a second moment where they raise their hand as citizens of the United States.
Thank you both for that. And, Mr. Gonzalez, you mentioned lack of outreach efforts or struggling with outreach efforts. Mr. Takano, you also talked about the need to identify, right? Being in the work that I'm in, I am aware that, one, our systems don't have a great outreach effort, especially if we look at things like the VA. Typically they have it. So what if they start self-identifying? Right? What if they start coming forward and say, hey, I am in the Philippines, I am in the UK, I am in Germany, I am in Kenya. I'm just naming these countries that I know of veterans that are stuck there. What can they be proactive in their own repatriation?
I believe they can. I have a lot across the border, but I have in other parts of the world that reached out to us and told us we're here, we know the bill, we hopefully it passes. And I think one of the biggest issues in Congress is, the climate that we have when it comes to immigration. The climate present-day climate that we're living, we haven't been able to pass comprehensive immigration. We haven't been able to pass a DREAM Act. And I don't consider this an immigration bill. I consider this a veterans' rights bill. And I try to differentiate that with my colleagues to say, hey, this is not an immigration bill. This is about veterans who wore a uniform and fought for our freedom and were honorably discharged and did their duty to this country and fulfilled their promise and fulfilled their contract. And we seem to have breached it. And I think you shouldn't have to pay your debt twice or forever. I think once you've completed your debt to society and have fulfilled that you should have the possibility to become a citizen as you were promised prior to serving in the military.
Would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think Vicente, I associate myself with other sentiments that in Hector's case, he had served Hector Morales had served his sentence. And then as soon as he had served the number of years he was supposed to serve in jail, he was deported. That's a very harsh punishment for someone that wore, the uniform of the 82nd Airborne. I just think that is a real stain on our system of justice and our laws. And so I do think we need to have sustained outreach. We need to mandate that the appropriations, whether it's the military, whether it's the Department of Justice, whether it's ICE, that we need to figure out who it is that we deported, take due diligence to find those people, to inform them. Once we are able to pass legislation which enables these individuals to seek re-entry in the country on the basis that they serve their country in reform.
Well, thank you, and I know we're getting close on time, so I just wanted to offer the opportunity for any closing remarks, but at the same time, I also wanted to do my due diligence as an advocate and plant the seed of the possibility of these deported veterans being subpoenaed to come and give their testimony here in Congress and make sure that the legislative efforts are being holistic in nature, right? That they account for the Hector Barajas, the Miguel Perez's, the Hector Lopez's, the different people who have gone through those trials. So I definitely won't put you on the spot because it's something that I wanted to open up as a potential for going forward. And closing out, any last remarks that you would like to give? I know both of you are very proactive, not just in the veteran space, but in the support veteran space. So I'm going to give you the opportunity for a minute closing, if you'd like.
Yes, well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to bring light to this very important issue. And I think I try to tell folks that veterans are being deported, just like Congressman Takano said, a lot of Americans don't believe it. In fact, a lot of members of Congress, when I first got involved, didn't believe it and were shocked to hear that we were actually deporting American veterans. So I ask you here in the audience to please contact your member of Congress, contact your U.S. Senator, and have them co-sponsor the bills that are out there and to stop the deportation of our American heroes and do all we can to bring our last men and women home.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's right. The GAO report was a good beginning, but it wasn't able to tell us what we needed to know. It did tell us disturbing things like agencies are not following their own internal policies. Mr. Vargas and I have written a letter to ICE demanding that they follow their internal policies. And you know, there's legislation that follow legislation that I and Vicente are moving forward through the Congress, but we'll need the outrage of public sentiment to help us power this issue through the Congress. And I think it's potentially there. You know, thanks to the organizers of this event, because it's evidence that there is a burning passion for justice behind this. That's what this is about, is doing right by the people who put their lives on the line for us.
Well, thank you both again for being here. I know you're very busy, and again, for spearheading a lot of the efforts in the veteran community and with the support of veterans. So thank